African Pirate Takedown, Chapter 1, July 1999, Abuja, Nigeria. The silver-haired gentleman looked out the plane's window at Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport. This is going to be a clusterfuck, he thought. He appeared to be in his early 30s, but he was closer to 40. His name was Robert O'Shaughnessy, and his friends called him Bob or Bobby. He still had a mild buzz on as the plane landed, standing up and stretching to get the kinks out. Good thing he had some meds for his back. Even flying first class with unlimited liquor, it was a long flight. He was a lean, compact man who moved with a smooth gait. His prematurely silver hair contrasted with his dark tan from working outdoors. Shuffling along like cattle, the dazed passengers dug out their belongings from the overhead and from under the seats. Walking up the ramp, he could hear the heels of his snakeskin boots clicking on the concrete flooring. Just moving felt like a reward. The passengers followed the path en masse to the baggage area to wait for the frequently overworked and usually indifferent baggage handlers to find their luggage. Since his wasn't the only black ballistic duffel bag on the conveyor, he had taped several colorful strips of duct tape on his bag for easy identification. The luggage had been left in a pile on the floor. Some digging would be required to find his gear. Good thing nothing was fragile, he said to himself. Not being used to African time yet, it was a drawn-out 2 hours before he cleared the board to indifferent customs officers. Finally, all of his luggage was present and accounted for. Outside the busy terminal, he looked for some sign that he was being picked up by the American embassy. Scanning the usual crowd, waiting for someone, he couldn't see anyone that looked like they were looking for him. No one was waving at one of the few white people getting off the plane, nor was anyone waiting with a sign. This was not starting out well. Shouldering his pack and grabbing the handle of the biggest rolling duffel the brigade quartermaster sells, he stepped out of the terminal and into the harsh Nigerian sunshine. He was looking for a taxi which looked like it might have functioning air conditioning. He fought off multiple invitations from the approaching rabble. A thin black hand snaked in to grab the handle of his luggage. An edge hand strike to the forearm made the hand quickly pull back with a yelp. A second hand went for the rolling duffel. An outside wrist twist, a motogiaku, put the miscreant on his ass with an injured wrist. He knew that once they got him in their taxi, the driver would suddenly forget how to speak English. Then they would have to stop at every relative's business until he finally spent enough money. It was a common hustle in many parts of the world. Spotting a late 1980s caddy that reminded him of Biggs, he started working his way over to the well-maintained classic vehicle. As he observed the comings and goings of the parking lot, he saw something that wasn't quite right. A large black woman with too much expensive luggage and not enough attention to her surroundings was being sized up as a victim. There were two men that had been standing together talking. Watching them take a step back and separating from one another made their intention clear. They were here to rob someone. That someone looked to be the large woman with too much to keep track of. Now the men suddenly didn't even know each other. They certainly were not looking at one another. The woman had way more than she could carry. She would drop one piece of luggage, then drop another as she was picking up the first one. She did this a few times. It was a clear case of if you can afford designer luggage, you can hire a porter to help. Seeing her coming, the man knew this could only end badly. Following behind, he caught up to the woman just as she was getting close to their planned ambush site. As she passed the first thin black man with a goatee beard, he turned and fell in quietly behind her. He failed to notice that the new arrival was now following him. As she started to pass the second man in a Planet Hollywood shirt and a baseball cap, he stepped in front of her and started walking backwards. He was trying to keep her attention by offering to help with her luggage. She kept walking until she finally dropped something again. As she bent down to pick it up, the second man behind her made a grab for the fallen luggage. He got a grip on her Louis Vuitton bag and then turned around to take off, back in the direction he came from. The problem was the man from the plane in his way. As the thief tried to go around the new arrival, he got caught on a rolling duffel that was shoved into his legs, and he tripped and started to fall. As the thief tried to catch himself in mid-stumble, he found a hand holding his arm back. The man's other hand was on the back of his head, slamming him into the pavement face first. He landed hard and tried to scramble up to his feet. The problem was the knee stuck in his back and a thumb in his neck that made him unconscious in seconds. Looking up from his handiwork, the new arrival stared at the second thief for a moment. That was all it took for him to make the smart decision to run away at top speed across the parking lot. Picking up the fallen handbag, he courteously handed it back to the startled woman, who had very little idea of what had just taken place. Giving her back her expensive bag, she was asked, "Is your ride nearby?" She answered that her car was in the next row. Walking the almost victim to her car, he helped her get her expensive luggage in a trunk. She waved as she left, oblivious to what had happened to her. The newcomer walked back to the direction he came from, looking for the old Cadillac. The driver was a thin and very dark man in jeans and sneakers, wearing a Harley-Davidson t-shirt and Ray-Ban sunglasses that looked to be in his mid-20s. As he approached the driver and looked up, smiled, showing his very well cared for dental work with only a few gold teeth. Approaching the cab driver until he was noticed, Bobby asked, "I hope you speak English." The driver answered, "Yes, sir. I also speak Hausa, Igbo, Yoruba, and Kunari, as well as several local dialects." "Excellent," Bobby answered. "I need someone who knows their way around. Are you that man?" "Sir, my name is Rampa. Whatever you might need, I either have it or know someone who does." Feeling better by the minute in his new home and thinking about a drink, the new arrival introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Bob." He reached over the front seat to shake hands with the driver. Then the new in town, just off the boat so to speak arrival, asked if they could find a cold beer for the drive into town. The passenger told Rampa that if he could get him to the U.S. Embassy without getting lost or sidetracked, there was a bonus in it for him. Smiling even more, the driver had his luggage in a huge trunk in what seemed like seconds. The driver gave Bobby a brief overview of Nigeria as he drove, stopping at the roadside vendor that sold cold beer. Now they were ready for the ride into town. Outside the terminal was the usual third world cacophony of traffic noise, barkers hawking their wares, and hustlers that offer anything and everything that a visitor might want. That includes some things that would shock and disgust the sensitive. Open-air markets where fresh meat, poultry, and fish were sitting in the hot sun. Healers and shaman were available if needed. The flesh peddlers were out in force selling any age and gender to a buyer that might be interested. The roadside bars and brothels were difficult to ignore. Nigeria was one of Africa's most populated nations, having over 100 million people. The nation contains more than 500 tribal and ethnic groups. The biggest groups are the Fulani and the Hausa, who are Muslim in the north, the Yoruba in the southwest, the Igbo, who live in the southeast, have traditionally been active in government service and business. English is still a common language for most of the country. Nigeria had been under military rule until May 29, 1999, when the civilian government had taken over in a bloodless handover. The military was now being paid to do nothing. That did not sit well with the general officers, for there was not much opportunity for them to make money nor advance their stalled careers. Keeping them appeased for doing little to nothing was expensive. Money for training expenses was now non-existent, and the military was losing its edge. Leaving the airport, they passed the usual shanty towns that are always on the outskirts of any large concentrations of population or businesses. The stench alone was enough to make Bobby roll up his windows. It didn't do a whole lot of good. He could never understand how people could survive living in such impossible conditions, yet fail to do anything to improve their standard of living. So many people with very little to do, and all day to do it, and still they can't get it together. They fight and scratch and struggle over the few resources available, and do nothing to improve their overall living conditions. Some things he would just never fathom. Hopelessness and helplessness were two of them. Seeing a world unknown to most people, he couldn't help but reminisce. He thought back to his family, Carol, Big, and the 39th Street gangsters. How on earth did he ever fall in with the baddest cocaine distribution ring in the Bay Area and be the only white boy? Like many things in life, it was unlikely that he would ever know the truth of it all. The sports successes and the incident with the Slocum twins and their worthless cousin Tim had all left their marks on him. He always had a choice, of course. He could have stayed in Livermore and built custom homes with his Uncle Ronnie. He could make a very nice living without swinging a hammer if he wanted. Except that Bobby liked working outside and staying in excellent physical condition. He spent most of his spare time doing things that interested him. He rode his mountain bike, did a spleen-bursting circuit training workout several times a week, and played golf occasionally. He had a dirt bike that he rode the local hills with and scared himself silly. His primary form of exercise was in some type of combative martial art or skill set. He trained with the finest instructors that he could find. Over the years, Bobby had trained with Japanese ninjas and Kali masters, losing most of his fingernails in the process. He trained with several great teachers, learning something important from each. He was always looking for good training partners, people that could help him sharpen his skills without putting too much unnecessary injury on him. There were always some wrestlers or jiu-jitsu people to roll with when he wanted some exercise. There's a very fine line between hardcore training and serious injury. Over the years, Bobby had done some wild and crazy, many would say dangerous training. He had trained with unpadded sticks, live blades, and real firearms. No sissies need apply. He could have said no to coming to Nigeria, but was there really any choice? His close friends and extended family said they needed him to defend and protect them in a faraway and dangerous place. What could he say? And how was he to know what would happen? Doug and Sharon had been with him since high school and stayed with him after the incident when too many people turned their backs on him. They were both chubby nerds, and it was only logical that they had found each other. The fact that Doug was black and Sharon was white didn't seem to bother people in a cowboy town the way you would think. Neither fit in with the other kids, and the gifted students respected them for their brains and intellect. The fact they were nice people didn't hurt either, and being friends of Bobby prevented any bullying or harassment of any kind. When they suddenly became rich by selling off their startup software company just before the dot bomb, they were left with too much money and nothing to do. Being too young to retire, what were their options? Thinking that this was an excellent time to travel and see the world, they made inquiries about a foreign service posting as members of the U.S. consulate. Going in any other capacity seemed too dangerous. Most foreign countries did not mess with the government of the United States. After the obligatory political campaign contributions were made as identified by the high-priced lobbyists they hired, the family was off to Nigeria as part of a trade mission. They didn't really have any diplomatic juice, but they were there on the behest of the U.S. government, and that meant something. Now all they needed was someone to look out for them. No, scratch that. What they really needed was someone to watch over them, much like a sheepdog watches his flock. Together they had zero streetwise, so the decision was easy for them. Who was the toughest, smartest, and meanest SOB they knew? Robert O'Shaughnessy was the only man for that job, and everyone, including Bobby, knew it. Getting him to come with them was no easy task. He didn't need a job. They had to convince him that he was doing them a favor. The Wilsons would be busy, and he was needed to protect them. In a place that was considered the most corrupt country in the world, robbery and kidnapping was not an uncommon event. Bobby's brains and street smarts would not go unused. They did not get personal security assigned as part of their posting. They would have to provide their own security, and Bob would not be authorized to carry weapons. There was no Second Amendment in Nigeria. Only police carried guns. Good thing he was bored out of his mind and needed some excitement. He agreed immediately. Pulling up to the curb of the U.S. Embassy, Bob couldn't help but notice the Marines in their dress uniforms. They gave him the slightly longer look that any European would get in Africa. Bob proceeded to the old colonial structure, the heels of his boots clicking on the gleaming tile floor. Patiently waiting in line for his turn, he glanced around at the cool off-white interior that had surprisingly few people. Stepping up to the information desk, Bobby was met by a rather frail and mousy woman who seemed shocked to see someone with luggage. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. "Yes, you can, I hope. I'm Robert O'Shaughnessy. I was supposed to be picked up at the airport. When no one showed, I took a taxi," he said with his most charming smile. Looking confused, the woman asked, "I'm sorry, sir, but who are you again?" This was becoming a definite clusterfuck. He again told her his name, and still his presence was a mystery to the receptionist. When he asked for Doug Wilson, he was met with more blank looks. At this point, Bobby was wondering if he was in the right building or had someone slipped him some drugs and he had been transported to the Twilight Zone. "I'm looking for the new trade minister, Doug Wilson. He arrived a few days ago. I work for him. I just got in from the airport." "Oh, you mean the nice new family that just arrived," she said with a tone of discovery, which finally solved the mystery at hand. Yes, that would be them. Now that they were on the same page, the receptionist once again asked for his name. Seeing that the problem was almost solved, Bobby did his best to smile and turn on the charm to speed things along. "My name is Robert O'Shaughnessy. I work for Douglas Wilson." "Hi, I'm Michelle," she said as she stood to extend her slender hand in a firm but polite one-pump business handshake. "You don't look like a personal assistant," she said, looking at Bobby carefully and liking what she saw. The man in front of her was like no personal assistant she had ever met. He was unlike anyone she'd ever seen. He had an outdoorsman's tan and a nose that was bent a little, with a scar next to his eyebrow. Somehow it only made him look dangerously handsome. He wore his hair long in an expensive cut. A weak, hand-wringing, fussy worrywart was not what stood before her. He made it appear that he had everything under control, and he had only just arrived. He reminded her of a rock star that looked like a school teacher and was built like a personal trainer, except that he was wearing surfer shorts, a Hawaiian print shirt, gold-tipped cowboy boots, and a Panama hat. Michelle knew something about intense and threatening men. She came to Nigeria to get away from her violent and abusive ex-husband. This man did not strike her as someone threatening, so that made him okay in her book. "Is that what I am?" Bobby asked, trying to keep a straight face and not laugh. "Well, not exactly. It's not really clear what you do." "I work at the embassy for Mr. Wilson." She would find out soon enough what his duties really were. "They're not all here at the moment. They're still moving into their quarters, a short walk from here. Would you like me to find you a ride to their house?" "Yes, that would be very kind of you," Bobby said with a smile. Michelle picked up the phone and called the motor pool. She spoke for a moment before hanging up with an uncomfortable look on her face. "I'm sorry, Mr. O'Shaughnessy, but since you are not technically embassy personnel yet, Mr. Grant says that transportation of your gear is your problem." "I see," was all he could say with a straight face. "Could you please find someone to show me to the Wilsons' new quarters?" "Of course, this will only take a minute," she quickly replied, embarrassed that Bobby seemed so powerless and lost. Like many women, Michelle couldn't let the helpless male remain helpless for too long. Sensing the change, Bobby started manipulating the process of making friends and allies, as he always did in a strange situation. "So, Michelle, what's the short version of your life story?" Bobby asked with a laugh that always seemed to put people at ease. "Oh, you know, the usual boring and uneventful life, I'm afraid," she said with a slightly nervous laugh. "No, I don't know," Bobby replied in a friendly tone that made the usual shy and mousy woman visibly relax. Once again, Bobby had enlisted someone as an ally without her even knowing it. "So what's the deal with this Mr. Grant?" "Mr. Grant is the Director of Culture and Protocol. He takes himself and his position very seriously." Her expression said it all. Another pompous, full of himself bureaucrat who spends the vast majority of his time protecting his little fiefdom. Bobby hadn't even met this man, and he already did not like him. This was not the best foot to get off on. He would have to watch himself. Making enemies on his first day so far from home would not be tactically sound. Further reconnaissance would be needed. Bobby found his people in the middle of moving into their new quarters. There was as many people as boxes standing around doing nothing. Looking around at the beautiful but unfamiliar embassy grounds, Bobby couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. He found Douglas arguing with some local about something that he couldn't understand. It became obvious that the workers were trying to hold out for better wages, and a work stoppage was in progress. This is Nigeria, after all. Nothing takes place without a bribe of some kind, and the deal was only good until someone thought they could make a better deal. This would not change anytime soon, and Bobby had to get up to speed soon or get left behind. Not being his first barbecue, he would have to be prepared in the future for this kind of thing. Deciding that it was time to get involved, Bobby approached the ongoing discussion and waited off to the side till he was noticed. Doug was the first to see him, giving Bobby a glance and a quick nod as he continued the argument. Moving in closer, Bobby was glared at by the spokesperson for the laborers. "What's up, Douglas? Is this man trying to hold you up for more money?" "I'm afraid you're correct about that. This scoundrel is trying to gouge us for double money, the money we agreed on." Douglas was flustered in the heat. "This is not a problem, boss man. Let's just go out and get some other workers," Bobby said with a sly smile and a wink that only his friend could see. The foreman did not miss this new dynamic and was not happy. "Send them home and we can do it ourselves," Bobby said in a sarcastic manner. "Enough talking. Let's do this." Bobby was taking off his boots and changing into some sneakers. Seeing his chance to make a buck slipping away, the foreman negotiator searched hard for an opening to save the business opportunity he needed so bad. "It's hot working in the sun. We need more money for this work." "I think we could come up with a little something more, but double wages is out of the question," as he put on his sneakers. "A bonus for getting the job done today sounds fair to me. What do you think, Douglas?" Sensing a breakthrough that would allow all parties to claim victory, the bonus for finishing today was agreed on. Once again, Bobby, the master consensus builder, had found the common ground to bring two opposed groups together. That is, for as long as it was in both their interests, however short that may be.